Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Trey Jernigan with Palmetto State Geckos. Huge night tonight. I've got a great person sitting down willing to talk to me about geckos. So I'm going to play this intro and then we'll get started. All right. So today I have Jeff Galewood. Jeff is in charge, owner, leader of JMG Reptiles. Huge name in the business. Anytime you talk some of the mainstream breeders in the industry when it comes to especially leopard geckos what I know and what I've read and what I was learning as I've started this, but also, of course, other reptiles. JMG comes up. It's unbelievable the history that comes with that. So today that's what we're going to talk about. I have a bunch of questions I'm going to ask Jeff. I'm going to bring him up now and let's say hello.
Hello, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. I really appreciate it. Like I said earlier, I'm at your disposal tonight. This is just to hear. I want to learn from you. I want people to watch this and learn. And we'll go ahead and we'll get started. I don't want to keep you all night. So I've got a couple slides I'm going to put up while we're talking. Here we've got Palmetto State Presents Q&A with Jeff. I'm going to pop over to here. You can still see me okay when I'm switched to the...
Yes. Yeah, I can see you.
All right. Let's start. How did JMG begin?
Oh, well, it was quite I guess the process where, everything evolved from. But my dad kept reptiles and amphibians when I was very small, even before I was born. He bred mostly frogs, though. Like, he had Argentine horned frogs, tomato frogs. I know he bred like fire-bellied toads. And he had a few other species. And he also bred leopard geckos, and he had a few African fat tails. And some of my early memories, I remember even seeing baby leopard geckos in incubator hatching. And I really liked his frogs. And he's always into fishing. He'd take me fishing a lot. And just had an interest in nature in general. But by the time I was like 6, I remember seeing a garter snake. And that's my first memory of an actual, an actual snake in person, because my dad actually did not keep snakes when I was real little. And after that, I kind of actually gained more of an obsession for snakes. And I think it was primarily because I was around amphibians and reptiles, and he'd have turtles too every now and then. Like, I know he had a couple box turtles. And so, when I seen a snake, I was like, well, I've never seen, anything like that before, because I'm typically seeing this. I even remember one time he picked up like a baby, I think it was a smooth front caiman for a friend, and he had that. He had tarantulas too a couple times. But anyhow, I wanted to start keeping pet snakes. And around the time I wanted to start keeping pet snakes, I was probably 7. Yeah, because I was really obsessed with like Eastern milk snakes. We had there's a North American Audubon for reptiles, but it's mostly illustrations. And so I'd always look at that. And by that time, we were moving, and he actually reduced a lot of his collection. And the only thing he really kept was like, oh, yeah, sorry, that was a big one I missed. He bred redfoot tortoises. He had a lot of redfoot tortoises. And by the time we moved, the only thing he really kept was the redfoot tortoises, because those were going to be easier with the transportation versus a lot of amphibians. And I'm sure the geckos, but he didn't really have a lot of leopard geckos, I remember back then. And from what I remember, they just looked like wild type, but they may have been high yellows or something like that, or hypos. And then I started, my pursuit into learning about snakes developed more and more. He'd always get Reptiles magazines. Reptiles magazine was a really big catalyst for my interest in breeding, because even though my dad did it, I was kind of aware that he produced babies and stuff, but it wasn't like presented to like the same way like Reptiles magazine was, where it would go through the whole, process. You could sit down and read it, and there was a new article, of different species, or multiple articles of various species every single month. And by the time I was like 10, I had, a couple hognose, and I had an African fat-tail gecko. I really like the African fat-tail geckos. I got my first African fat-tail gecko when I was 9. And then around probably the age of really like 10, 11, I really started paying attention to leopard geckos because of the diversity and genetic traits that were being shown and stuff. And I'd seen them at reptile shows too. Like Murphy patternless, Tremper albinos, and started seeing blizzards. Like I didn't see those until a little later. But anyhow, I remember our one classroom they had a leopard gecko, and I was like, well, my dad used to breed those, and I was reading about leopard geckos too, and all the line bred traits and just diversity and morphs, and they were also pretty affordable. So at the time of being like 12, I was like, well, I have hognose snakes, I have a corn snake. And I actually already bred a pair of hognose at that point. And I had an African fat-tail gecko, and I was like, the African fat-tail gecko was wild caught, because that's pretty much in the late 90s. That's all you've seen at the shows were wild caught fat-tail geckos. And that's another thing I left out. My dad would always take me to reptile shows. I'd always beg him to take me to reptile shows all the time. And
so was he selling any of these, or he's just, this is a hobby, this is,
He did when I was real young. Like before I was born, and then like when I was probably like a toddler, he'd go to reptile shows. Okay. And he did sell. And he'd bred Argentine horned frogs. He would sell leopard geckos, baby redfoot tortoises, and probably a few other species. I'd have to ask him. I don't, because you'd always tell me about the shows, but I don't think I really ever asked him too much about before I was born and like when I was really small, what species he primarily sold when he'd go to the shows. But I think it was mostly frogs. And but then when I started getting more into leopard geckos, and I was like, well, these are cool because I can afford them. There's all kinds of cool different patterns and traits that I could possibly get. And there really wasn't. I keep saying that, but it appeared that way back then. But compared to what else you could find at the reptile shows and work with, I was like, well, these are cool looking. They're nice. They make good pets. They're easy to breed. They're affordable. There's a bunch of cool morphs. And there's always somebody at a show that had them. So I started buying some, and my interest in them wasn't waning at all. And I was always talking about it. And so that kind of reinvigorated my dad's like whole passion and everything with the whole deal. He's like, hey, do you want me to, you want to breed leopard geckos together? And basically, it was put, in a way that like, hey, I have money. We could actually buy, racks and do a bunch of cool stuff. And it didn't happen like that quite right away. It started out small, and then it started growing. And then as we started breeding and everything, we were both enjoying it so much and all that. And then it kind of took off from there.
So about what time is that when y'all are started, you're just like, leopard geckos, let's go?
That would have been like 2002.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, 2001 probably, because I remember by 2003, and I even think actually in 2002 we had some king snake ads, but we didn't actually have like a yearly subscription, but we just had a few, so we were dabbling in that, but we were mainly going to local shows. And I know by 2003 we were definitely pretty actually heavy at that point. So I think it was more like 2000, 2001 where I started first picking out and looking at leopard geckos. And actually some of the first leopard geckos that my dad purchased that we were looking to start projects with, he actually kind of said, well, you can choose some. And some of the first ones that we bought together, really, he was buying them, were hyperzanthics, the start of the hyperzanthic project. And they were from Robbie Hamper, and those came from Gourmet Rodent. And they were these really bright yellow leopard geckos that had this unique look. And that's, I thought they had a unique look. And so we bought a group of them. There was only like 3 or 4 that looked like that. We bought them all, and that was pretty much the beginning of the hyperzanthic. But we line bred them for about 8 years before they kind of transformed into what you kind of see now. And now they've, transformed even more from there.
Yeah, my buddy of mine that works with me, he's actually how I really got to start looking into JMG was because he found you and bought a hyperzanthic snow.
Okay.
And it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful gecko. So that's when I started like, okay, let me start looking more into this and more into this. And Yeah. So that's, I mean, that line right there is what got me looking into, and I still don't even have one yet. He's going to let me breed his this coming season. And so that'll be awesome. But that kind of leads right into the next one when you talk about your dad. So basically, you two have been working together for leopard geckos since the beginning. So it wasn't like your dad was doing leopard geckos and then you came in. You kind of said, "Hey, I like these leopard geckos," and your dad was like, "Well, I make money. Let's do it." So
pretty much, I think I'm a kid. I don't have any money.
Yeah.
It would take me like a year to get like saved up like $250 doing chores or saving birthday money or whatever. And I sometimes probably make a little more than that, but a lot of times it would go towards hognose snakes. And then, initially I started out with like 2 leopard geckos. Like, I remember I was trying to beat up this guy on a $55 Murphy pattern list, and I wanted to give him $45 for it. And then I remember, another leopard gecko I bought was from Mark Bell from Reptile Industries. And it was a big, just nice wild type male that had nice yellows and nice kind of like lavender kind of saddle still that were kind of remaining, even though it was like a bigger male. And it was $35. And so he actually gave me $5 back. And he goes, I didn't even ask. He goes, help save the kids some money. But my dad kind of knew Mark back then. But that was when my dad was still actually taking me to the show with just my money and buying stuff. And then it was like shortly after that, he was like, well, let's just do this together. And, so then at that point too, actually after a couple of years of going to shows too, and he could see that, like, it wasn't really a phase, and he was enjoying it a lot too. So then, he started investing even in more money. But then the whole deal was like, well, we're going to be making money from this, but most of it's going to be going back to me for a while to pay for all these, racks, the animals we invested in, and, food. And then, so it took a little while to start gaining some income. But anytime I did have any extra money from it, it would just go into hognose snakes usually, because I still growing my hognose collection then too on the side.
How far were y'all traveling to go to shows? Were they all just local to Ohio, or?
No, we were going to a lot of Pennsylvania shows, even when I was like 14, 15. By the time I was 15, we were going to a lot of shows. And my dad's, he's actually, when he gets motivated, he wants to do stuff. And so the big expo was Daytona. So when I was 15, we went to the Daytona Expo. And actually but the following year, when I was 16, we actually vended Daytona. But the very first year we ever went there, I remember I was 15, and it was just there to buy stuff. And I saved up like $700. And that pretty much all went to hognose snakes. And I don't think we bought any leopard geckos that year. I know the following year I think we did, and a couple years after that. I remember buying, I don't remember what year. I think it was like 2005 or 2004. We bought a Raptor.
That had to be right when they were starting, right?
Yeah, I think it was like 2000. You know what? It's like, yeah, it had to be like 2005, and it was like right when he came out with them. And he wasn't. It was funny though. We actually bought a Raptor from him, and at that time, he wasn't really. We paid like $600 for it, but it only had one partial snake eye, and it was definitely a Raptor. We produced, of course, Raptors from it, but he wasn't even calling it a Raptor. But I think it was from the project, and it was like, unless we interpreted what he told us at the show back then incorrectly. But I recall it because Raptors were a lot like. Generally, he was charging like $1,500 for them. We got that one for $600, and it was like half snake-eyed. And so we would pick up leopard geckos at the shows too, but a lot of my memories of going to these shows and searching for stuff, it was mostly hognose snakes. When we would acquire leopard geckos, we did so initially a lot at shows, because we would travel to a lot of shows. We do shows in Maryland too, and if we seen any cool leopard geckos or ones that we thought were interesting for a project, we'd pick them up. I think we picked up most of our leopard geckos from what I recall. Like most of it were online, sales.
So what kind of struggles were there at this time? Like that breeders today, they don't see this because now you have Morph Market, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, you have all these platforms where you can advertise, you can go get, you can, it's kind of, I relate it to, I was shopping for a dog, and when I do anything, I have to research for years. So I was looking at dogs, and I was, torn between a Cane Corso and a Dogo Argentina. And so I'm reading and I'm studying, and I go down to Miami where one of the founders of the breed lives now. And I'm talking to him, and he's like, I'm like, what was the struggle? And he's like, oh, we were in Argentina, and you couldn't just, have a dog because you're breeding all these, you're trying to put all these things together. So you had to send mail from Argentina all the way to Europe, and then have that dog put on a boat and sent to you. So when they were doing that back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, I couldn't imagine what it was like to try to create something like that back then. Now, not saying that at your time in 2000 it was that crazy, but how different was it then trying to get together all these parts and pieces that you wanted when you started to build a line that nowadays people just take for granted?
Well, back then it was like the beginning of like line breeding and selective line bred traits. I mean, they did exist. There was like tangerines, and the tangerines were kind of more of like high yellows, and you get some like orange spotting on them. There wasn't really carrot tails were, and like super hypos were coming out, and there was people like, line breeding them to get to that point. By the time we were, kind of into the leopard geckos for a couple years. And but see, sometimes these people had morphs like that, but they, weren't really being shown, like, these projects that they were line breeding, because it was late 90s. We're going to late 90s, early 2000s. So it was a transition from reptile shows to online, sales, and just the community switching over to that, slowly. That kind of happened. You're right. It was pretty, it was really because there would be a lot of breeders, because even when we went to Daytona, when I go to Daytona like in 2000, from 2003 to 2007, it was extremely different. It was pretty cool because you didn't know who was really going to be there. I mean, you get the vendors list, but a lot of times it'd just be a name listed, and a lot of these people didn't have any online. They didn't make any online appearances. They didn't have like a website. They didn't. There wasn't Facebook. They wouldn't post their animals online. And back then too, people would have like websites, and they'd have like a simple website made, and that was like kind of like the, is about as far as you could go as far as getting your name out there, along with going on Fauna and like King Snake. And so you go to these shows, and a lot of times you would see all kinds of stuff, and breeders, vendors there that you weren't expecting, and they have species that you didn't expect to see there, or they had like projects. Like I'd run into people that had like locales of Western hognose, and there's no way to know that they're going to be there, and so that'd be exciting. You'd even see it with geckos. I remember we bought some pretty weird African fat tail geckos that kind of looked like granites, but they didn't pass on any of the qualities, and so we ended up just overpaying for basically just normal fat tails that looked weird, but they looked weird, but the trait did not pass on. I think it was just a variation from something because sometimes you get the starburst like fat tail geckos, and that was actually a name coined by like Mark Leashock, and that was kind of appearing more in like het albino fat tails, but that's actually line breedable. But for whatever reason, this one just didn't really. It just kind of flopped every time you try to breed it back, or you just wouldn't get any of the outcome you were hoping for. As far as what the adults looked like. But there was a very big transition. Then there was a lot of wild caught stuff when I first started going to shows too. There wasn't a whole lot of morphs of really anything. There were like for like corn snakes, and you see albino ball pythons, and there were leopard gecko morphs again, like Tremper albinos, bell albinos. The blizzards were then like coming out, a few years after I was doing shows or going to shows, and rainwater albinos, and then you see like jungles and stuff like that, designer stripes. But you'd see a lot of like normal bearded dragons. There'd be people with tortoises, a lot of import stuff. There's Burmese pythons, and especially albinos, and you'd see people with retics, rainbow bows, all that stuff. And nowadays, you still see a lot of these same species, but there's a lot of morphs. It's a lot of captive breeding now. not as many people that, like back then there was a lot of buying and reselling and a lot of importing, and now everybody's online, so there's usually not much of a mystery for like what animals a breeder has, because they're going to be posting them on Morph Market or on Facebook or or on their Instagram. You're going to be seeing what they have. So basically back then there was, and the other thing is too, there wasn't like a whole lot of talking about like genetics. Like the understanding of genetics wasn't as good as it is now in a lot of these communities. A lot of incorrect terms, more so back then. There wasn't really too much concern for lines. There wasn't like anybody keeping like good details of like, oh, this is the lineage they came from. They'd have like a nice tangerine leopard gecko on play sand in like a plastic box, and it'd be like $30. You'd see stuff like that a lot in like the late 90s, early 2000s. So a lot of our original tangerine founding stock for blood hypos came from just dark burnt tangerine lines that we picked up at reptile shows. And if you asked a person like what kind of leopard gecko made these, they're like, oh, I don't know, they were just like darker orange, or like this one is more muddy colored, and like I just brought them together, and they're like, the one guy was like, well, they were kind of hypo-ish and they were pretty, and they made some that looked like this, and that was like the explanation you got.
Yeah. See, that's it's crazy, and especially like this being not my first year having reptiles, but the first year like delving in and wanting to breed and pick and choose and do this. And it's like, you start stepping, you think a little bit, and you go to like a Repticon, like there's a Repticon close by I went to, and it's crazy, and you don't know what's going on, and there's a bunch of people, and this was right towards the tail end of COVID, this at the beginning of the year, and I say tail end, but as it here in the South, they hardly paid any attention to it anyway. So we're there, and it's like you got your elbow to elbow, and you're trying to ask questions, but you're just going off. And a lot of the people that you see there, they don't know what they're like. They it's still today. It's especially, it's like, because I feel like the shows now are just for people that are just trying to get rid of, oh man, I bred too many, I've got a bunch of these, I'm trying to get rid of this, because most of the sales now are happening by online and everybody's seeing it. So, and again, and that's just the experience I've had from 2 or 3 that have been local. So it's difficult when you don't know everything that's going on. And so I'm it's a good thing that it's gotten more precise, because it's all, I couldn't imagine doing it when you're like, oh, we don't know what else could be in there. It's like the snake community. It's like the more different things that pop out, it's like, oh, okay, this is great. But you can't do that with leopard geckos. It's muddy.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment, because and that, you actually kind of see that even nowadays too at the shows, because if you have like a really, like say high end, or a really nice, say for example, a really nice leopard gecko you produce, say it's like a really high quality black knight. Mm-hmm. And then you have the lineage behind it. It's way better to post that online, and so you have obviously a much larger audience to connect to that might be interested in the animal. Mm-hmm. And then at the show, it's like, well, you got to pack it up, and then it's like, it's only 1 or 2 days, and there's going to be a bunch of people asking questions. It's like, if somebody really wants a black knight, say of like pure lineage and a really good quality, they're probably going to be shopping for it for a very long time and being very precise and looking for it online versus going to a show. Yeah. So, actually, when I go to shows, I don't usually bring too many high-end animals with me. Every now and then I'll bring a few. I'll bring a couple, for example. But, I'm usually bringing more, semi-affordable stuff and more like animals that would be more like pets. So I bring like, pet, or animals that would be more likely to be purchased as pets. And then medium to like medium high level like range, like morph combinations and stuff like that, especially because sometimes people at shows are looking for deals, and it's like if you have like a really nice blood that's from like your best stuff, it's not like you're going to want to be dealing on that. So a lot of times I'm not going to bring it, especially if somebody tries to offer me like $200 less, I'll just keep it.
Because it's not really an impulse buy, because people are going to this with the intent of hey, I'm going, but it's not a hey, I'm going there to spend $400 and I see 1,000, like, that's hard to pull off. So that makes sense that you would, you want to, you got to guess at what the price range people are going to be going with it. It's funny because it's like the first second of the show, I see people, hey, how about $50 off of that? Like, well, they're going to be there 3 days. Why take cuts the first second? So it's definitely experience. I don't know if I'll get to a point where I'll do that. I'm sure I will. I mean, it's kind of inevitable, and it's a cool thing too. Like, it's cool to see, all the different reptiles that you don't normally mess with. My daughter loved it. She had a blast. So it's probably something I'd like to do. The Daytona show's next weekend.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to it, and I still might be crazy enough to drive down there. It's about 7 hours for me, but I have to fly to France Sunday. So it would have to be drive down there Friday, stay, come back Saturday, and then 12 hours of flying on Sunday. So I don't know. We'll see. It's still up in there. It'd be cool to see. I wonder how many people will be there with everything that's been going on. But Florida, like I say, South Carolina has been bad with not paying attention. Florida could care less about COVID. It was fun going down there a couple months ago. What other members of your family influenced it? I see you talk about your sister every once in a while. What's the rest of your family doing while all of this is going on?
Well, my sister, she lives about like a half an hour from me. I see her every now and then. She definitely likes wildlife, and she has a degree in environmental science. And she has like one pet frog. It's a waxy, and we'd go herping sometimes together. And she actually helped with the reptiles for a little bit one time, like during the summer. She wanted some extra money, so we kind of had her like part time helping us, but it wasn't really her thing. And she's very well read. She likes to read. My mom is, I don't know, like neutral on animals. She likes dogs a lot. And actually, when I got really sick, it's a long story, but I needed extra help. And then I was in the middle of a move too into my new place. And she needed, because then her job was laying off all kinds of like people and stuff because she was in the restaurant industry. And so she started working for me pretty much like full time, helping me. And she actually helps maintain a lot of the geckos and stuff and everything. And, she actually has some that she likes. And, but she's getting really good at taking care of them. There's still some things where she's like, doesn't recognize certain things with the leopard and the fat-tailed geckos because she's, not like a real big animal person, but she does pretty well. And like, she comes in like, we'll go over things, and we'll go over kind of like the schedule of like, taking care of stuff because I still have animals at my old place still transitioning over here. And so she's pretty involved in it. And but it's interesting because she's not really that, interested in reptiles. And the one time too, I was like, fell behind and had a bunch of people that were supposed to help me and then weren't able to. And so I needed extra help watering hognose. And I was like, I don't really have much energy today. And she had a hognose immediately start chewing on her. And she's like, what do I do? And I was like, well, I'll lift up on its rostrum and do this. And she removed it right away. And I've seen people that, have been in the reptiles for 10, 15 years, and they don't want a hognose biting them. Even getting bit just gives them that reaction where they just want to, yank back, fling, or like, it just freaks them out. And she didn't really care.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, my wife, she could care less, and like I'm going to be gone for a week, and I've got babies that are due while I'm gone, and I'm so angry because I'm decided I like traveling for work when I have to, but now it's like, crap, who's going to take care of? So she's not very happy that she's going to have to pay attention and do this and do this and do this. So this whole week is going to be a whole lot of, hey, watch, do this, and me praying while I'm in France that she doesn't make a mistake with these babies. But
yeah, notes on them.
I'm going to. I don't because I know them. I mean, I'm up to 50 now, 50 breedable geckos, and which is a lot when I had only 3 in February. But no, I know them. I know everyone and everything by heart. So now I'm going to have to. Yeah, so I'm going to have to put notes on all of them, and it's going to be interesting, to say the least. So moving into the next thing, JMG Gecko Line. So y'all have started, you're going, you're running. and you're able to selectively line breed things into what you have done enough to say, hey, that's a JMG. And when you go through Gecko Boa's site and you're looking at genetics, you see bloodline JMG, radar JMG. It's awesome. That's unbelievable. That's like most of the people nowadays pray that someday they will get to that point, and y'all have done that. So, how many lines are there that you claim this is a JMG line? I have some of them listed here in the picture. One, of course, is my gecko, Odin. He's a super giant bell radar, blood. So, yeah,
you showed that. He's a pretty impressive male. But there's certain things like the radar. That's it's like a morph combination, but it was a bit of a tricky one because all Eclipse originally were all Posset Tremper. So first we had to test breed, and we had that was the first thing I wanted to do. And at that time too, everybody was very, very particular and about not mixing lines of albinos and being pretty certain of your hets. And it was funny because it wasn't like that in 2000 or in the late 90s. That kind of happened around the fauna classifieds to gecko forums, kind of like transition where the leopard gecko community started developing and lines started becoming more important. It happened fairly quickly. So we had I remember we had 5 Eclipse that were pos het, and we had them all in separate, all individual, big enclosure, and we would breed them, and we keep track of all the eggs laid, and we had 2 that we were certain, these are not het Tremper. So we bred them to our nice tangerine line bells, kept those babies back, bred them together, got some nice radars. And, so there's some line bred qualities in the radars we had, especially because I don't know how a lot of other people's made theirs, but some people ended up buying them from us. I know a few breeders that said they were just going to breed bells to Eclipse, make radars, and then just keep breeding them back into bells and basically hope the Tremper vanishes. But they said that it would, but it's if you keep back a small percentage of just bells and then you restart the project, that's a high chance after so many generations. But if you're keeping back a decent amount of them, if one of them's het, you're getting 50% of that's passing on. But we did it that way, and we used some pretty nice tangerine Eclipse from Raptor lines, and so that actually kind of improved those lines of radars that we had because we were taking tangerine lineages that were only in Tremper albinos, and they weren't being mixed because people didn't want to mix them. And so when we had these tangerine Eclipse that weren't actually het Tremper albino, we were taking some really nice tangerine lineages from the Raptor that we were working with, but with the Tremper now removed with just Eclipse and put into the bell. So then we started making these very nice looking bells and radars, from that project. And but that was a morph combination. We did quite a few morph combinations where it's this person produced it first. That was probably one of my favorites, though, that you pointed out, just because it wasn't simply just taking because we made Snow Enigmas and stuff and Super Snow Enigmas. That was obviously a lot easier to make. There was no test breeding or anything like that. And the cool thing, too, was there was other people that were going to make radars but weren't doing test breeding. And we still beat everybody to it, even test breeding and everything. But we jumped on it right away. That was pretty much the first thing I thought when seeing Eclipse. You got to put this into other morphs. But as far as actual lineages, bloodlines of a polygenetic line bred trait, we have Lavender Stripe, which is probably our least talked about, and I don't really have too many from that project anymore. Steve Sykes actually bought some very nice ones from us back in the day when we had those, and he actually continued that line from those initial ones that he got from us. And he's definitely improved on them a lot.
Now, it's funny you say that because lavender, by far, I'm a purple guy. I like purple. And lavender, it was one of the things that sold me immediately. And I bought a bunch of geckos from Steve, and 2 of them were snow lavenders, and they are the most beautiful. I love these 2 geckos. One's really a really fat one I named Shaq, and then I got a smaller one named Laker, and she is gorgeous. She is it's just the whole, both of them. They're both, and luckily I finally got them to breed this season. So I love that. Lavender is what really, I didn't understand why people weren't trying to make more lavender geckos. This is so much better. A purple gecko is so much better than a black one, which I say that and I'm going to anger a lot of people, but it's gorgeous. I love them. So I didn't even know that lavender was one that y'all started.
Yeah, actually, well, I think because you're asking like why more people don't. A lot of lavender dissipates on most morphs and line bred traits with age, and I think a lot of people, kind of abandon those projects if they start trying to line breed it, and then they notice like, well, this one, the lavender is dissipating, and you actually seen this with the hypermelanistic line bred traits, because there was somebody in Europe. They had some very nice ones, but it didn't really seem to run too consistent. I think it was black velvet they called it. And then there were the black pearls, of course, and then we had our own lineage, which were charcoals. We ended up also having black bloods that could actually fall into a hypermelanistic category too, but we kind of considered it more into like just a deep dark tangerine category. But that's actually separate from, because a lot of people would ask, is there black pearl or black knight and black bloods? And I was like, no, they're actually just pure blood that life started to look a certain way. Because certain bloods got line bred and actually spun off into more super hypos. And then the original ones actually had more spots. And because actually I sold some really nice pure bloods. Steve got some. And actually I've seen Sage Quiggle has some bloods that are, they're about 100% pure, but hers are like super hypo. But those were the bloods that kind of spun off into that direction. And that's the thing when you're line breeding. It's actually easy to spin stuff off without even realizing it. Actually, I've seen it with red stripes back in the day. Some of the best looking red stripes were 2003 to 2007. And that guy was very, I don't know, his take on line breeding was interesting. He went up to like F12, and it was HQ Reptiles. And every year he'd have like the F7 to F8 to F9. And he had amazing looking red stripes, and he kept line breeding them where they had more and more carrot tail and like a perfect stripe white, centered tail and an orange down the sides. And during the mid-2000s, too, there was a strong desire to get full carrot-tailed animals. So I think that was turned into his main goal. But as the animals got more orange on the tail like that, and they were getting more hypoed out, the body would be very faint, and there'd be not very distinctive stripes on the body. And the body would be kind of like patternless, and there wouldn't be the nice crisp orange stripes. And so it got kind of spun off into that direction and changed. So, I think the initial question you asked was like, how many lines do we have? Well, we have lavender.
And what you were saying with the lavender, like mine, they're 3 years old, almost 3 years old. Because how Steve holds his for a while, and they don't come out to and they're still purple. They're gorgeous. I don't talk to them as much because I love them. Whenever I say what's my favorite, they're gorgeous. But yeah, please go.
Yeah, it's one of those few lines. Yeah, that's the thing. It's one of the few lavender lines. That's the thing too. Like, because we started selling lavender stripes, and we had been line breeding. And you know what the funny thing is? Lavender stripes were actually a spin-off of red stripes. Our original red stripes from HQ Reptiles, he had some very pretty ones, and the one had very high lavender walls on her sides. And we bred her, and we noticed her lavender walls didn't really disappear, and she was very pretty. Just kind of looked like a nice striped leopard gecko, standard, black, connecting stripes, yellow background, but her sides maintained lavender. So we kept back a few of those, kept line breeding it, and kept getting more and more and more. And that project took about 7 years, where we maintained ones where they'd be like 2 years old, and they had that cool frosted lavender side. There's also a girl, I think she got some from us, and I think she had her own line, but she did an extremely good job on line breeding lavenders and lavender stripes. She actually took some and I don't know where hers are at now or what happened to that project, but is Rebecca from Dragoon Geckos. Hers were an extremely impressive line of lavender, and then the line of lavender we worked on maintained really good lavender sidewalls that did not dissipate. Steve maintained that project, and they look very good. And so if you line breed this stuff, but you got to be mindful, too, when you're line breeding this stuff, because a lot of people think you just can keep advancing, but then if you do certain things, it can actually transition into characteristics that you actually may not have wanted. And so that's happened with like a decent amount of projects I've seen through over the years, where a project kind of comes and then goes. And actually now red stripes there's actually a good amount of really good looking red stripes now. And I guarantee like none of those red stripes are probably even really related to those original lines from HQ Reptiles that had that really distinctive, perfect orange stripes. Some of them may be kind of, because he actually got those originally from the one that started as red stripe project all came from Ron Tremper. And then you actually seen Ron years later pop up with his own Fred Stripes. And so I think it was all within his own line, and he actually reline bred stripes that had the good potential to make those kind of qualities. But he started producing them years down the road. Because I remember getting some nice red stripes and seeing them from around like 5 years ago. And that was 10 years past HQ Reptiles red stripes.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I talked to some of these older people that have been in it a while, and they're like, man, all these new people are coming in, and they're getting all excited about these, like they're new, like the clowns, and they're like the older heads are like, man, that's just an Emerine Tang that we've had forever, but now it's got a jungle stripe, so it looks, and it's getting brighter, but it's like, they think it's funny that all these new lines are popping up that, well, it's kind of been there. It's just been quiet, but now it's because there's so many new people coming into it. It's almost like it's a resurgence of stuff, and they're just got to roll with it. Oh yeah. Let's do it. So it's funny that you say that.
Things changed a lot in 20 years. Actually, in the past 20 years time, 20 years ago there was hardly any really good line bred traits. I mean, they were just starting. And there wasn't really anybody, again, like keeping track of lineages. And now in those 20 years, you've had traits pop up and kind of go, re-pop up. There are things, though, like say if you have, like, say, things like Clown G's or Skittles, some of those are really nice quality Emerines. And if they take those and they maintain a lineage and they keep breeding them and they don't do a lot of outcrossing and they get really specific characteristics, then it's like, and especially if they're running more true than, say, other Emerine lines, because a lot of the original Emerine lines are pretty sporadic. So if you're getting some really nice thick markings and there's some definitive characteristics, I think a lot of those things can be worthy of, like, definitely being called certain lineages. And that's kind of the fun part of it, because there is crossover, because there's a point where something is a new lineage where it becomes a new lineage. Yeah. And just line breeding something for a very long time may really result in that. And actually, I think pretty much anything could if line bred long enough. But certain things, like say if you're line breeding something and it kind of still looks like everybody else's, if you maintain just a small little quirk and you keep line breeding it, it might actually turn into something completely different. But who knows how long that'd take? I mean, certain things could take who knows? I mean, the leopard gecko line breeding, the community and just this whole experience is actually very new and very young. The first real line bred traits didn't start popping up into the early mid-90s, and there wasn't a whole lot being done with it, again, until around the late 90s, early 2000s, especially around the early 2000s. So, I mean, it's definitely a little older than what I've said, but as far as a large group of, hobbyists and people that like working with leopard geckos and line breeding them, it is still pretty relatively new.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to this first volume of my interview with Jeff Galewood from JMG. It was an amazing night. It was 3 hours and 30 minutes of us just talking about geckos, his hognose, his business, my business, the business in general. So make sure you keep tuning in. We'll keep dropping these volumes every couple days until we get the whole story out. Make sure you subscribe. You can set an alert to let you know when the next one's there. Thank you for all your support, for everybody that's helped me. You know who you are. I really appreciate it. Keep it up. We have content like this. It's going to be coming out quite frequently, more interviews. So stay tuned. Keep listening to what Jeff has to say. Thank you.